Welcome to Old English, or at least a very early version of it. What you recognize as Old English, if you actually can recognize it, won't show up for another few changes. But oh well, this is the second half of a series where we develop Proto-Indo-European into modern English. So instead of wasting time on an intro, so first things first, we're going to lose all final open vowels. That should mean we're solidly out of Proto-Germanic. The phoneme O is no doubt one of the most defining characteristics of Old English, but unfortunately it does not exist yet. We're going to fix that with diphthong height harmonization. O becomes O, U becomes ew, which is written as ew for some reason, and ow becomes ah. On the other side, I becomes ah. These two will eventually raise up into o and e, which, as you'll note, is the exact opposite of what happened in Latin and also earlier in English, but that only forms long diphthongs. Short diphthongs can form via breaking. Ch, l, and r, when before a consonant, are velar, which means they're basically back vowels, except they aren't vowels, so nobody cares about their length. When positioned before any of these, e becomes o, e becomes u, and a becomes a. This also works for the long vowels, except long e, which doesn't exist because of an earlier rule. We'll take a break from that to move into palatalization. When before e or y, or sometimes just any front vowel, k becomes ch. K is also spelled with a c now, and ch is spelled with an overdot. G becomes j, which is rare, but it exists, mostly in Gemnitz and after n. G becomes z, which is not the same as y, so we write it differently, and sk becomes sh. All the other ones do have to be before a front vowel, but sk almost always does this. Orthographically, this requires the next vowel to be spelt as if it were a front vowel, even when it isn't. The same is actually true for y. Note that this is not the same as actually diphthongizing the vowel. Yong is different from yong. On the other hand, the opposite happened to shoot, which swapped from a diphthong to an orthographic convention. Umlaut, again. This is actually the more important umlaut because it also affects front vowels. A becomes a or e before nasals. O becomes which becomes e. All these diphthongs become u, and u becomes u. This is written as ie for some reason. Now, if you look at Werner's law, it affects forms of a verb differently, but this is usually corrected down the line. The second umlaut is unique because it breaks up lemmas. We have foot and feet, and old and elder, and gold and gild, and food and feed, and fox and vixen. It's exciting. English uses burn compared to German brennen. This explains why we don't see björnu instead of birnu, but burn also used to be strong, so without metathesis, not only would we have Bryn, but it would be Bryn, Bran, Brun. But this isn't just about burn. We also have third compared to German dritte. This is a semi-regular metathesis that happens before s, n, d, and ch. But for every one word where it happened, there's two where it didn't, so take this with a grain of salt. Anyway, now high vowels drop off at the end of a word. I've been consistent about not really spending too much time on word final syllables, especially when they don't affect the stressed syllables. For example, the vowel only drops off when the vowel before it is long or when there are two or more consonants in the way. In both of these cases, it just doesn't matter if there's a vowel here. Now y disappears too, only in the middle of a word. Now you can write it the same as ya. Now ch disappears too, only in between two vowels or between a sonorant and a vowel. We actually only have evidence for these two, but there aren't any words with chna, so yeah. It also lengthens the preceding vowel. Be careful with this one because plural forms will have a vowel while singular forms don't, though English is a lot more friendly to weird plurals post-umlaut. Hey, remember when we were splitting up front vowels to make diphthongs? Let's do more of that! This time the condition is if there's a back vowel in the next syllable, and it's only for short vowels. Next up, the palatal umlaut, which I think is a misleading name because ch is a velar, but chus and chut turn front vowels all the way up to e. Okay, there's too many vowels to keep track of. The stressed vowels can stay the same. Long, unstressed vowels can get away with just shortening, but for the short, unstressed vowels, low vowels disappear. High vowels disappear after a long syllable, otherwise they become e. Front vowels become e at the end of a word, back vowels become o. This writing convention e is probably just a cover-up for the fact that they're Stressed vowels shorten if they're behind three consonants or two syllables. And u descends into o. Nobody liked that guy anyways. Hey, remember like 1,000 years ago when the and the hardened? Well, believe it or not, the still hasn't hardened, except only at the start of words. we've now made it to what most people would consider early Middle English. Homoorganic lengthening is the process whereby a sonorant and a voiced plosive lengthen the preceding vowel. Homoorganic lengthening is one of the most disgusting sound changes because it's really irregular and it goes back and forth and it has its own spelling rules, and also just lengthens ah into just ah. We get wind and wind, o never lengthens, and doesn't work on a, but generally a sonorant and a voiced plosive voice a stressed vowel. Otherwise, stressed vowels shorten if they're behind 2 syllables or 3 consonants. Didn't I just say that? Anyway, we've had our fun with o. O flattens into eh, and ah flattens into ah. E also becomes e, and e also becomes eh. Next up, long ah raises into long eh, but it's a slightly lower eh, so find a way to write it differently. The same thing happens to long ah. Chra, chla, and chna all lose the ch. If r isn't geminate or at the start of a word, it becomes ya or wa depending on the surrounding vowels. Both ahs become the same ah. Ch inserts one of those approximants without disappearing. Vowels lengthen in open syllables. That means if there's only one consonant in the way, it becomes long. Every single unstressed vowel becomes schwa, and then word final schwa drops off. If it ends in a g, it becomes o. If it ends in a wa, it becomes o. Alright, okay, that was a lot to take in, but we made it. Not to Middle English, but to when the spelling system was cemented. So now you can use its current pronunciation to determine how it is spelled, and then pronounce it from there. With a few exceptions, all consonants will be spelled normally. Since we're not doing Anglo-Norman words, we can throw out Z and J. But there are a few consonant things to take note of. Obviously, you know how palatal consonants are spelled. F is spelt as V when it makes a V sound. Ch only becomes H at the start of a word. X is hs, as you can imagine. Vowels are the more involved part. Pretty much all short vowels are spelled like how they look, except U. U is sometimes spelled as O. Blame the Normans and their E. Long vowels are the main focus, though. Long O is OO. Long E is EE. Long low E is EA. Don't mind me just lying to you, because the long E's are pretty much spelled the same, usually only when pronounced the same. When EA makes other sounds, that's the low E. Also, the homoorganically lengthened version is IE. Long low O is OA, and sometimes O in an open syllable. Even if there wasn't a historic schwa sound, the silent E is still written, hence stone and ice. Long I is always written with an I in a long syllable or Y word finally, unless it's homoorganically lengthened, which, like I said, is the worst. Long U is written OU or OW. This is all pre-Great Vowel Shift, so it's inaccurate, as you probably understand English spelling to be. Also, this one isn't spelled differently based on homoorganic lengthening. Over to diphthongs. These are produced by ch and r. I is AI, sometimes it's EI, but thankfully the Americans fixed that. EI is also written as AI unless it's I. Short E emerging from IG, which is actually more like the I disappearing and leaving only the consonant, is written Y, and OU is written OW. Yes, that is exactly the same as the long OO. You know this. OW is written AW, and OI is written OI. These only exist from loanwords, but hey, you might do something weird. LU is written as EW, or sometimes U in an open syllable. Fricatives at the end of word after a short vowel are always written doubled, and so are palatals and velars, and they have weird ways of doing it. Sa at the end of words always has a silent E after it after a long vowel, and if the word would be less than 3 letters, don't be afraid to add random silent letters. So, let's take the time to look at an example in depth. Someone in my comments keeps suggesting this video idea, which I guess is fine in theory, but also, I don't really know much about Latin or Norse, which I feel would kind of mess with the idea, and everyone keeps giving me polysyllabic words which generally don't work out nicely, but whatever, let's do my name, Sineopus. So first of all, the laryngeal disappears, and since it comes after the vowel, it becomes long. Next up, Grimm's law changes this into a f, and the stressed vowel is here, so both of these fricatives voice because of Werner's law. The unstressed e raises up into an e. We want to spell the y differently, and both of the o's swap out for ahs. Then the long one goes back up to o. We skip a bunch of laws that don't apply to this while I question my choice of an example until the final r drops off. The v hardens into f. The final ah brightens and then drops off. When this y disappears, we get basically the same thing as friend in that it becomes ew. This unstressed vowel shortens, then drops into o, and then it disappears because Middle English hates unstressed vowels. Now, If you hadn't noticed, synth doesn't work as a word and neither does synth. So what happens? Well, as we see in head, sometimes "wa" turns into "wa" in Middle English when we would have a multisyllabic word with a cluster that wouldn't work out. This happens in Hawk too. Again, because there are technically two consonants here at a salient point, it doesn't lengthen, so based on spelling rules, sino with a doubled consonant to prevent the vowel from being long, and we end up with sino. Now, and this is important, rule -1. Are there any wrenches that could be thrown in these gears? That is to say, other words that sound similar. And there is sinew. Now, sinew actually develops the same as sino, at least at one point. However, I'm a bit hesitant for the reason that sinew is a bit carried away by the development of the verb to sin. Both of these are pretty irregular. I mean, for one thing, we should really expect sign from sinew. So I really think it all depends on the complicated interplay between these three words. That being said, sino. Thanks for watching. New videos every Wednesday. I can't think of an outro, so I'll just say what's already written there.